Hello, welcome to the Sharp Angles podcast. I am Dan Pizzuta, joined here by Rich Hribar. Here we go, Rich. We're still straight ahead toward the draft. Things are kind of happening. We're in this weird, little week here where it's not a lot of information has happened. Like all the pro days have happened, so we're not getting not even that we're getting new information in the pro days, but they're also just it's not even fake new information from pro days right now. So we're just kind of in this place where everyone's just kind of getting their takes off, I think, and that's
Oh
kind
yeah,
of where we are now, headed into the draft. So as we sit here today, how you doing?
we're doing good, man. We are in prime. Don't believe anything you hear mode at this point. Now it kind of started this week, right? Like this felt like the first week where it was like, all right, like this is all just like either smoke or BS or just stuff is getting out there through agents at this point. We have Matt Corral now potentially going pick 6. Desmond Ridder is now like a mid first rounder. So we're in prime, like kind of like I'm not believing anything that I hear from this point on.
No, you can't, because it's just every possibility is getting thrown out or right now, and we have a post at the site that's tracking some of the rumors and stuff that at least the ones that we think at least are should somewhat be tracked, I guess, because there's so much going on right now, and I think you kind of hear it from beat writers. Agents are trying to put out stuff, teams trying to put out misinformation. So we have absolutely no idea what's really what we should be paying attention to in terms of where draft stock is right now. But I think we have some cool things that have come out when we're looking at what draft stock means. I think grinding the box has been great in terms of just taking where people are going in mocks, and you can kind of see that. So that's kind of you can see where stock has been up and down. ESPN Analytics just put out a draft tool that are the percentage possibility that a guy is there at a certain pick and what the most likely pick he is. I mean, that's mostly using ESPN's boards and things, but that's a fun thing. And Brian Burke had done that back on Advanced Football Analytics years ago, and I remember playing around with that a while ago. So that was always fun. So we're getting cool things where we can play around with some of that information. But yeah, you're right, to get back to your original point, knowing exactly what's going on, Trayvon Walker now apparently number 1 pick. So we're trying to sift through all of it and just kind of get to the draft at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess if you want, we can start with the Carolina thing. We can kind of work our way down and see what you think they're going to do. I mean, you look at Scott Fitterer. Last year was his first year as a GM. He traded back 4 times. To me, that this just screams they want to trade back anyways. They don't have a pick in the second round. Yeah, they don't have a pick in the second round. They don't have a pick in the third round. You're at pick 6. You might not love any of these quarterbacks. And we saw last year when they weren't in love with the quarterbacks that were available to them when they picked J.C. Horn. Who was still left? Fields and Mack were still left at that point, and they didn't take either of those guys. Maybe they don't love either of the guys here. They're just trying to get back. It feels this is a team that needs more draft picks too. We kind of talked about them last week or the week before, that the roster isn't as bad maybe as people believe it is through their win total, but this is a team that still just needs more draft picks. Having only 1 draft pick in the first 3 rounds on this roster just isn't quite enough, and it feels to me like they're just screaming hey, we would like to go back a little bit if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. So for this show, just in general, well, we've been going through team needs on sharpfootballanalysis.com. We've just been writing up the offense. I've been writing up the defense. We're just kind of going to go through some of that, have maybe some team level approaches here for how we're viewing the draft. And as we'll start with the Panthers, because you're right, they are possibly the most interesting team. I feel like there's always these inflection points at the start of the draft, and it's always the draft starts at this spot. And I don't think the Panthers are necessarily, because 6 is far back enough, and we still don't really know what's going on in the first 5 picks. But I think that the Panthers are probably this first really big inflection point of what potentially could shape at least the top half of the first round. Because you're right, I think we're seeing them connected to all the quarterbacks. I think a lot of people are trying to put that Kenny Pickett connection there, but we've talked about Kenny Pickett. picking him at 6 is of like the insane quarterback moves the Panthers have made. Like Kenny Pickett at 6 might be the most insane. Like that might be worse than the Sam Darnold trade. If like that's, especially if that's like a save your job type of pick. So we talked about Pickett a couple weeks ago when we did the quarterback episode, but trading down does make a lot of sense for them. Like you said, they need that extra draft capital because they need some bodies there, and like the defense isn't that bad, but like even places where they were good last year, especially like on the edge, they lost Hassan Reddick, and now you have Gross Meadows, who's going to be like sliding in there, and like you're not totally sure whether like he's going to be the type of guy that you need on the other side of Brian Burns, who of course is very good, and he's going to need an extension. There's a lot of moving pieces here, and like at what was it, like 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago at this point, when we were talking about some of these teams, like I kind of talked myself into Jimmy Garoppolo on the Panthers, and I still kind of think that might be an option, right? Because they cleared all that cap space because they did the Deshaun Watson thing. So like they needed to have the available cap space to bring him onto the roster if there was going to be a trade. So now they're sitting with like the most cap space or around the top in the league, and they're one of the only teams that could bring in Jimmy Garoppolo like right now without anything. So I think trading back and getting some of those, like some extra mid-round picks, and then using one of those to potentially trade for Jimmy Garoppolo, like might be the path we see the Panthers take.
Yeah, I mean, they are in like that desperation mode. So I mean, but basically all the beats too. Their beats close seem like they would be surprised if they took a quarterback, which kind of reinforces what we kind of said too, that they're just trying to get accrue more draft picks. They've got some other needs, like you said, definitely edge rusher. I mean, the offensive line still. They've added some pieces. They signed Bradley Bozeman to play center, Austin Corbett right guard. Are they going to trust Brady Christensen to play left tackle? That'll be a question mark for them as well. They just need they just need more pieces and kind of more depth. Is Terrence Marshall, are they going to give him another runway as a wide receiver 3? There's still a lot of just questions here of like they just need more picks to accrue these. Like you're not going to solve these things with like your 5th round and 6th round picks, which is where they're basically starting the draft after the 1st round. But yeah, the NFC South is one of those divisions where it's kind of after the Bucks, like it go in a lot of directions. We kind of talked about that a few times. I mean, Atlanta is basically punting this season. They probably should have punted it last year. It's unfortunate because I don't think that Kyle Pitts is like from a player selection stance a bad pick, but they just in a QB rich class, they had no business making that pick at pick 4. Now we don't know what was available to them in terms of trade downs. But I mean, this is a team that just needs as many draft picks as possible. I mean, we put their team needs basically as thoughts and prayers on the website.
Yeah, you did. You had that, and I did not change it when I posted.
They have like maybe 4 to 5 like actual NFL players that like you would build like moving forward with on that roster. And they're going to get cap space next year, and they were trying to get to the Deshaun Watson this year. But after next year, after this season, they have the cap space to kind of make some more moves in free agency and stuff. But they probably, I don't want to say they really screwed themselves last year, but they probably should have started the process a year earlier than they did, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I think it was hard for them because I don't really think they had the ability to move on, kind of because of what the Matt Ryan contract had been like up to that point. Like before they realized they needed to tear it down, really. And so I think it would have been tough, and maybe we probably would have seen like what Justin Fields is going through right now, where you're still a team that didn't have any cap space, didn't have any like real draft capital, and a team that still doesn't have a lot of talent on the roster. So I think like the Falcons probably just would have been the Bears at this point, which is a team like we're not totally sure like where their path is going forward. So I think the Falcons were kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of thing. So I think they, it kind of seems like they of the places they could have gone, like this isn't necessarily the worst option. Like, yeah, they are probably like a year behind where they could have been. But in terms of, clearing that cap space out and kind of setting up what this team can be, I think they really, I don't think there was a good option for them. And I think like where they go here is interesting. Cause I think like once we look at some of these things, it's not only like where are these teams going to go? It's like, what do these teams think of themselves and what do they think their timeline is? And I'm interested to see where the Falcons kind of think they are, because obviously on offense, like they don't have anything.
Anything.
Yeah, like it's Kyle Pitts, and then that's it. The defense is interesting too. Like as I was looking at it, like you have Grady Jarrett, who is going to need another new deal. And the way they've kind of talked about it feels like it's not sure if like signing Grady Jarrett to an extension is going to be something that really like fits their long-term like path really. So like you wonder if this is his last year, if this like maybe he's gone before the start of the year. Yeah, again, it's a little hard to this late in the offseason to fit someone like that onto another team's cap if the trade does happen. But there's always ways around it. The weird thing is like this second, I like the secondary. I mean, the safeties aren't good, but like when you have AJ Terrell, like we've talked about AJ Terrell a lot last season. AJ Terrell's really good. Like Casey Hayward, they brought in,
Yep.
and they brought back like Isaiah Oliver. Like that's a pretty good like starting cornerback rotation in nickel. So it's kind of weird where like some of the talent is, but right, obviously it's not going to be good when you look at what the Falcons did. But they just they're one of those teams that you just kind of probably gonna like sit out a year. Like they're a team that like should also trade back, but we can say that for like almost every team in the top 10 right now, whether you're going to be able to trade up. And I think like we'll kind of say like there's no quarterbacks that like warrant the trade up, which is usually where they see, but teams are overconfident in the players they like every year. Like we're going to see trade ups. Like it is going to happen.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how aggressive it is because it feels like a class where the teams that want to move back need to have more pliability in terms of like what they receive in compensation as in terms of previous years past. I don't know if teams will necessarily cave, right? They're going to use the old value charts and not necessarily want to try to maximize value if it's like a quarterback and quarterback trade up. So I'm curious to see if teams will be more flexible in moving down in terms of like compensation from years past. It's a bummer too, the Falcons, because they get a great player in Kyle Pitts who maybe transcend it. But I mean, his whole rookie contract is basically going to provide no leverage to them, which is the down note too of doing the situation that they had last year. And it's going to be curious to see what you mentioned the Bears. The Bears were another team that really stood out to me. And I didn't do the defensive side, but I assume it was just as bad because I mean they're just terrible everywhere, and they're another team that just doesn't have really the allotted capital. To kind of like make this work in a year. Like Ryan Poles has work cut out for him. They were able to get one, second rounder back, but they don't have the first round pick because of, acquiring Justin Fields. And we were pro Justin Fields on this podcast, but he's put in a spot now where it's kind of hard to see him like really like he's going to have to elevate everybody else, which I guess you're going to find out real fast if he's that type of quarterback. But they're hurting like every position across the board here.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, when you look at the defense, there's like there's guys who are still good, and especially like in the secondary, I think there were guys that like kind of progress. You just kind of have to like figure out where your expectations are, right? Because like Jalen Johnson in his rookie year was okay, and like he's been good for a second round pick. I think you can like say the same thing for like Kindle Vildor, who's like been all right. But again, like a fifth round pick. So like these guys are playing better than you would expect them to be. But like if you're going to be a great secondary, you probably need production that's a little better. But like Thomas Graham, again, is another guy who was last year's sixth round pick. It came on like he didn't play a lot, but when he was there, like there were like some flashes. So they have like a whole bunch of guys like that. But again, like you're talking like a lot of things need to break right in order for these guys to be like really good and for like the defense to be good. And like when you're looking at, like you said, the offensive depth chart, like that, yeah, this is another team that needs to probably trade back and just accrue as much draft capital
Well,
as
they
they
can't
can.
trade back.
Oh, right. Like, but like
There's nothing to
even,
trade back to.
but even in the second round, I think they have a second round pick, right?
They have two. They have two second round
Yeah.
picks.
So like I think like just even doing that, I think just collecting those type of assets and again, like not in the first round, but you're right. Like they are a super interesting team. Like again, like, can you have a decent offense with Darnell Mooney and Byron Pringle? Like, yeah, I guess, maybe. Um, but you're right. But this does seem like it's going to be like has to be like a year three type of like the path for Justin Fields. And like when you're there, like that's when you need to start making
Yeah.
calls on fifth year options and where the future is. I do think they do believe in Justin Fields. Like I've seen some like maybe they're doing this just because like they just don't believe in Justin Fields, so they're punting. Like that's not how this works. Even though it's a new regime, like they're not punting this because they've given up on Justin Fields after 1 year.
Yeah, I mean, this is the position that this regime was placed in. Like they
Yeah,
didn't set this up. They're inheriting this.
yeah, absolutely. And like that's kind of I think we've seen this in a couple of places as we kind of look at um the just kind of the landscape across the league where you see like and I think this kind of like potentially goes for the Panthers too. Um like when you see the home run swings at quarterback in an attempt to save a job. And I think we kind of see this like with the Giants cap right now and how they're trying to do it. Like when you like allow these like lame duck regimes to kind of have their one last go
Mhm.
at trying to prolong their job security. It almost always blows up. And then the regime that comes in after, we're seeing this with the Bears now. We're seeing it with the Giants. They really have to do a lot of work in year one. It's almost like a year zero if you're like really grading out these guys and how they're bringing around like how to rebuild a roster. You're really putting these guys like way, 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 way behind the eight ball, just because of the leash you allowed like the previous regime, who like was going to be fired. And I think we're seeing that in
For
a
two
lot of
years,
cases here.
multiple
Yeah,
years with Matt
right.
Nagy.
Yeah. um. So I one of the things that I think when we're like going through the team needs is like there's a lot of teams, and we kind of I think I hinted on this last week. There's a lot of teams that like have decent players, but just as the roster is constructed right now, there's like not a lot of players. Um, the exact opposite of that is the Houston Texans, who go like 9 deep somehow at every position, but like maybe there's one and a half good players. So they they're super interesting to me in a sense of like where they think they are, because like they were another team that like kind of came in last year with I mean ended up like the Watson thing was not something that they started with, but trying to like rebuild that roster in a way, and they kind of just brought in all those 1 year deals and like they're gone now. They brought in a whole bunch of other 1 year deals, and like no one is really like there's no one on that like who on that roster are you like building around? Like who is the future in Houston? And there's no one. I mean, they like just re-signed Brandon Cooks, but like Brandon Cooks is not your like foundational building block. You're probably going to move on from Laramie Tunsil in probably a year. I'm kind of surprised that that didn't happen this offseason. Davis Mills is not like the quarterback you're building around. I think it probably makes sense to like give him one more year as you figure this out. But like eventually the Texans have to get players, right? And like now they do have
Well, they were in the position the Bears were in last year. They just didn't have any draft capital. That was the killer because of all the trades that Bill O'Brien had made. They knew this last year and they tried to scorch earth, and now they have at least the second most, in terms of like, draft value. So at least this year is to get the ball rolling, right? Like this is your like first year, like you said. Last year is definitely year zero.
Yeah, and I kind of need some I need a little bit more like proof of concept for the Texans. I think.
Well,
Right?
Lovie Smith wasn't it?
Oh man, no, Lovie Smith was not it. But like they've gone around this offseason the same way they did last offseason, at least like through free agency. And, they do have the third overall pick. They now have the 13th overall pick. So they do have these 2 first rounders. And what they do with that, I think, is like one of these things, like what do the Texans currently think they are? And how do they think they are going to build going forward? Because right now, like they could use help anywhere, right? Like they do not have top tier talent at really any position.
None.
Yeah. Like they have like some guys like they brought in Obo Okunraku from the Rams, like who was like flashed in a part-time role as a rotational edge rusher, and now he's the number 1 guy right now. Yeah, so they're like taking swings like that, and I think they're like very slowly building this up, and I think like at some point you just kind of need to do it. You need to like put the pedal to the floor, and I guess we'll see that with their 2 first round picks. Yeah, and you just kind of have to, because like the more you prolong this into like these 1-year deals and like making like everything is a bridge to something else. Like eventually the bridge has to lead somewhere.
Yeah, and there's another team clearly trying to play for another top pick next year. There is nothing here, like you said, and it's you don't even you're gonna give Davis Mills the year, but like what could he possibly even like show? He played well like as the final 6 starts like last year in like a climate that wasn't very good. But yeah, I don't know what kind of production you're gonna get. Like he's not gonna move you off of a quarterback if you're picking in the top 10, right? Like how good of a year can you potentially have? And if he does have that year, are you even picking there, which is probably in the lower range of outcomes anyways here. I do kind of like that they're just still not like throwing money at like positions that don't matter. Like they're just like they just signed Marlon Mack. Like who cares? Like they should just, they'll probably add a rookie on like one of their day 3 picks, but like they're a team that has like no business. And maybe them and the Falcons that both wrote up on the offensive side of the ball, even though they need running backs, they're not teams that should spend premier capital at this point on a running back. Like there's just no point. There's no point to burn that premier capital on like a Breece Hall, have his rookie contract come up, and then you're not even good through the period of it. Add some day 3 guys, sprinkle in some guys that get some touches. You see what they have. Maybe you hit. But those teams, like those 2 teams, have no business, even with the needs they have, not taking a running back early. I still like am holding out like a candle for Nico Collins to like be a contributor, but it's
Sure.
You've got Brandon Cooks and Nico Collins. I kind of like Brevin Jordan as like a move tight end. So, I mean, it's more of like just hope with these guys. It's not, they weren't premier capital prospects. Like they're probably not going to get a long leash once you start adding premier capital prospects to compete with them. But they're going to have this year kind of just some runway to see what happens. But yeah, it's just a team that needs everything.
This is a dynasty fantasy football roster that
a bad one. It's an orphan. It's like someone quit your league. They quit your league.
Yeah, it's those guys that like they could work out. I'm holding on to them, hoping. But there's nothing else there.
Hey, they coaxed Brandon Cooks into re-upping.
Sure, like Brandon Cooks probably just doesn't want to move anymore. Like I'm here. I've gotten traded 9 times. I just don't want to go anywhere. So I kind of
wanted to get traded just to, I kind of wanted to have it just to keep the unique element of his career going. Like him just continually changing teams and being a good player.
Yeah. So I think that like we'll talk
Plus
about
we just wanted him like on the Packers or something too. So
yeah, just anywhere that kind of mattered a little bit. Yeah. And so like the Texans are one of these teams with 2 first round picks, and like a lot of teams currently have 2 first-round picks just because of like how aggressive some other teams, like in the back end of the draft, the better teams in the league have been aggressive at trading those picks for these players. So the teams with 2 first-round picks are really are interesting. Like we've kind of talked about the Giants. Like the Giants are this team that like they don't think they're good.
Zero.
They're pushing everything back. I've heard like some people try to say like the Giants could be like a sneaky like playoff team. Like they don't view themselves that way. Like they want nothing to do with the highly paid players on the roster. They're riding that out. And they're waiting for that lease to be up and they're moving. That's where they're sitting right now. The Jets though, the Jets are interesting because like there's a lot of places they could go, and they're a team that like they could be like 2 good first round picks away from like being decent. Like especially on defense, like you could potentially like Carl Lawson is going to be coming back on the edge. Like that will help. They have some like useful pieces that have developed a little bit. And again, like they are a team where you look at, what they've done in the secondary, especially last year, where like they have pieces that you like and have like exceeded expectations like a little bit. But again, like you just kind of need someone else to be there. Like Bryce Hall, was a good college corner before he got hurt, and then he fell to the 5th round. Like he's been okay, like more than you could like want from a 5th round pick. The same thing goes with like Michael Carter, who was a 5th round pick last year. They just signed DJ Reed. Like that's a decent enough secondary. So I think if you like either you can add a corner, you can maybe add a pass rusher, and all of a sudden that like defense starts to get put together. And I think if you have like a Robert Saleh defense that kind of has some more pieces, it becomes somewhat interesting. And then if there's a wide receiver that you put on offense, like I was talking about like proof of concept for the Texans. I got the proof of concept for the Jets, like on both sides of the ball. Like they were one of those teams where like they were doing good things. The talent just wasn't there. And I think like, especially on offense, like the quarterback is a big reason why, and you kind of need to see that step up. But like they're a team where I think like if you put some more pieces in place, like that could potentially like go together, and we could see, something a little better from the Jets.
I think the Jets are pretty interesting. It just so much is we all know where the thing stops here with the Jets. And it's just how good is Zach Wilson going to be? How does he develop? But I like the offensive line came together towards the end of last year. They got rid of all their bad offensive linemen. They add like a Tomlinson. They seem hell bent on getting a wide receiver. Like they've really been like in the mix for like a lot of guys, and they just haven't landed it. They were in on Tyreek. So I assume they're going to use probably pick 10 on a wide receiver. Probably not their first pick. So we're going to add another wide receiver. You just have to go because you're stuck going all in on Zach Wilson at this point. I definitely have my problems with them taking Zach Wilson last year, but he's here now. So we've got to make this work. He's got to get so much better though. I mean, oh my goodness. I mean, Zach Wilson was so atrocious as a rookie, and like, it was one of those years, like you don't see guys bounce back from, but everyone kind of was subpar last year. So this rookie, as great as that rookie class was coming in objectively last year, I mean, there are a lot of questions that are going to be answered, because if you have back-to-back seasons where they're subpar, now you're in the danger zone, right? Like you live this life with Daniel Jones. Not everyone is Josh Allen. Like everyone keeps comping stuff to players to Josh Allen and situations to Josh Allen. Like there's a reason why Josh Allen stands out, because it doesn't really happen a lot. It doesn't work out this way very often. So I mean, we know where the buck stops, but I do like that the Jets overall arc and plan. To me, that the most interesting team with the 2 first-round picks is the Eagles. Because they play in a division that's winnable. I mean, I think the Cowboys were all expecting regression, especially defensively in the turnover front. They've lost some key offensive pieces. They still probably have the most talent in the division, but the Eagles are a pretty sound team, like all around. And we saw them make the playoffs last year, although they didn't really beat any. They beat one team with a winning record last year. But this is a team, if they could just get Jalen Hurts to take another step up, again, the buck stops there, but they're not tied to Jalen Hurts like the Jets are with Zach Wilson. If Jalen Hurts still gets them to like a wild card or like a fringe pick, they've got a lot of ammunition to move on. They also have like a viable backup to turn to in Gardner Minshew. But this team does not have a lot of like just raw holes. It's one of the best offensive lines in the league. They definitely need more help in terms of offensive like skill player playmakers. I know we're big Quez Watkins fans, but Zach Pascal's not going to cut it as the wide receiver too. Jalen Reagor's basically already out the door, like a foot out of the door with the organization. And the defense is relatively good. So, I mean, what they do with these 2 picks, and they're set up with more picks in the future, I mean, I genuinely just like the direction the Eagles are moving in right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a team that always is going to have sound process. I think like not all of those moves are going to work out. And I think like, again, like we kind of saw it with like the multiple swings they've taken at wide receiver, right? And we're probably going to see like year 3 is what, 3rd year in a row that they'll probably take a wide receiver in the first round, because it does
Matt
seem
Millen
to be
twice.
going that way. So like they're still taking smart swings at things. So when a Rager doesn't work out, like there's still enough depth there, and they've put themselves in a position where they could like replace him. Like the same thing is kind of, you know, gone with corner, and like they've taken a lot of swings at offensive linemen, and we'll continue to see that. You know, like the Andre Dillard thing hasn't like completely worked out, but we all believed at the time that was like really good process. And then they kind of just have like Jordan Mailata sitting there, and Mailata just turns into you know, one of the better tackles in the league. They just continually have options for themselves, and I think like that's like just one of the things of why you see this roster is kind of as deep as it is. I think there's like still some things in the secondary they could probably, you know, add to, if they wanted to do that. But again, they have a lot of picks. We talked about it last week with that trade. You two are now giving yourselves multiple picks in multiple years now, where they have the 2023 first round picks, where if it's a quarterback, they can take that. If it doesn't need to be a quarterback, like then you're still set up, because you're probably like maybe replacing Brandon Graham. But you've kind of already done that with Hassan Reddick, right? Like you have like, you go like 4 deep at least inside. Like you know, Fletcher Cox gets released, but he gets re-signed. But you still have like Milton Williams, who you just drafted in you know, on day 2 last year, who can come in. You have Javon Hargrave, who's already there. So they just like, they're continually like, and I think like it goes into a point where like we're doing these like team needs things, but like rarely are team needs heading into the draft like rarely does like or if you're drafting for a need, it's not always, you know, going to be your need. And if you're like drafting for like what we think is like, oh, maybe a luxury pick that you don't need,
Right.
it could very quickly be a need going into the future. And I think we kind of like see the Eagles as a team like that. And I like, you look at like the Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb was was a luxury like 3rd wide receiver for the Cowboys when he was drafted, and now like they need him. Like he is that offense right now. Be like what 2 years in, 3 years in. So I think we like the Eagles are a team that I think like very that that does like see that very well. And I think they kind of see the board, they know like how to move around it. I don't think like we don't see them like targeting like positions that like don't really matter. And I think
Yeah.
and
That's the
not
big key.
and in matter, right? Like but like the highly valued positions, like they're taking the swings on the tackles, on the wide receivers, like those types of things. And like they think they can you know, fill in at linebacker. And like a lot of people are trying to like mock them a linebacker, and it's probably just not going to happen in the first round, because that's just not how they value the position. They think they can kind of fill in around that, and get, you know, places on the outside and that defensive line to be better. Like they'll probably just like take another edge rusher, even though like they already you know, have all the pass rush you think they like could need for this year. But going into next year, that could be a need again. They just continually stock up on positions like that, and I think that's kind of why the Eagles are where they are.
Yeah, they kind of get it, except for the, maybe the internal process. I could have helped them with some wide receiver picks for sure. They took two guys that I definitely thought were terrible players coming into the league, in Rager and Arcega-Whiteside. So could have helped them out a little bit. You get with me, Howie. But yeah, I mean, one of those other teams I think that you constantly see get mocked, a player that probably isn't going to fit their MO, is the Bills, right? Like the Bills, like they're not going to take Breece Hall, right?
No, I don't think so. It doesn't. Yeah, I don't think that fits what they want to do. And I think like there have been some stories like coming out of Buffalo where like Brandon Beane has said, like, if that is the best player, like I'm not afraid to like take a running back when it comes to like the first round value. But like I believe him, but I don't think any of these running backs are guys that really fit that bill. And I think you can, we just kind of,
There's
seen it with,
no running back goes first round, right? That's the pick, right? Because
yeah,
if they don't take him, no one else is in that spot unless there's a trade.
yeah.
And if you're trading up for a first round running back,
Yep.
it's a whole
So
other issue.
yeah, absolutely. But I think, yeah, I don't see, I don't see that happening. And again, like the Bills are a team that like we're gonna draft all the edge rushers. Like they need a corner.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, especially like Levi Wallace, like I think one of the most underrated corners in the league. He's been really good for a while in Buffalo. Like really stepped up when Tre'Davious White was hurt, and now he's in Pittsburgh. So I think they really need that that second outside corner, opposite White, going on with Teron Johnson, who's also like very good. Yeah, it kind of helps that those safeties are great too. But again, like the Bills are an interesting spot because like they are clearly like this win now team. But when you look at like some of the ages and what's going on, like both of those safeties are in their early 30s, and those guys are guys that are playing like 95% of the snaps if they can. But there's not a lot behind them. So I think the Bills are both in this like we need to win now and have people that can contribute like immediately in 2022, but also like in the long run, they need to start thinking about some of these older guys they have, especially on the defensive side of the ball, where they need to start filling in and thinking about what the future could be, and partially like injury too. Like luckily, like Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer have not really been hurt during this run. That's been good. I think we kind of saw it in 2020 when Matt Milano went down. Like that really hurt their defense. They didn't really have like the linebacker, and that's a team that like lives in nickel like 90% of the time. And like that's such a huge piece. I think that, like they do have these like great foundational pieces, but the depth behind them, they don't totally have something that can step in immediately. And I think like if that's kind of like where that roster is shaky, which like it's not a shaky roster, but if there's one kind of concern, it's kind of like that depth in behind those players that, again, like if you lose one of those guys, like you're kind of screwed anyway. But there's still not a lot there. And I think like that's a place where we can really see them probably, maybe get like a little aggressive in those early rounds.
Yeah, that back end of the first, not just because they're good teams, but I mean, a lot of those teams have a lot of, everyone's expecting that to be the wide receiver hotbed, but all the top 5 wide receivers could definitely be gone by the time even the Packers pick at 22. And then are you reaching at that point? If you have to elevate a George Pickens in the first round or even a Jahan Dotson, it's going to be really curious to see how those teams play that in that position, because you saw Daniel Jeremiah have the tweet yesterday about, now is it do you want to have that 5th-year option not for quarterbacks but for wide receivers? Because you had talked about too a while ago too, the 5th-year option, it probably doesn't carry as much weight for quarterbacks as it used to, especially in the back half of the first round, when it's basically now this year right now it's 22.4 million, for Daniel Jones. For Kyler, it's 29.7 million, and they will pick it up because of the insurance for the contract. But that's the exact number of what it is for the franchise tag for a quarterback is 29.7 million. So I'm curious to see what the 5th-year option, the impact it has on this draft, like especially for this quarterback class. If we see teams trying to trade up for like the token years ago. It'd be like, well, do you trade up to take a Desmond Ridder at pick 30 or something, right? Does that happen? But now do we see wide receivers though get elevated because of the contractual leverage? I'm very curious because we've been writing up these team needs, and I'm going through the 5th year options that are coming up for me. Almost all of them are guys that aren't going to have them picked up. Like almost all of them. Like, you talk about Andre Dillard, like he's not getting it picked up. Guys like Caleb McGrary, like he's not getting his 5th year. Unless these are mistakes that people are making. Like, are the Raiders going to be a position they have to pick up Josh Jacobs, I suppose? But Noah Fant was the only guy so far that Ted has picked up. They have till May 2nd, so you can wait till after the draft. But as I keep coming across these 5th year options in these team needs, I'm like, well, they're not going to even pick this up. Because due to salary. So it's one of those things that may just be overstated during the draft period now.
Yeah, I think so. And like we talked about it during the quarterback episode. Like I think we're seeing when you don't know about these quarterbacks, it's going to be more of a detriment. Like, again, we see it with Sam Darnold. We can't trade Baker Mayfield because of it's fully guaranteed. And I think like that's the thing now. Like when we used to talk about it, it was only guaranteed for injury. So you could pick it up if the player didn't have a good year 4, you could still move on. And now that's not the case. I think it is interesting a little bit like for receivers because also if you're going to use it, you could bake that into the extension.
Yes.
Right. So you can kind of like use that as the base. So I think maybe wide receivers or you use it a little more there. Yeah, I don't see it for maybe like if we last year, I think it's interesting for quarterbacks because like last year we would see it. I think like it makes more sense, but also we saw all of them go by 15. And you had the good quarterbacks were gone, and then there were no good quarterbacks. And I think like this year, there's not good quarterbacks, so I don't think we're gonna like get a trade into the back end. So maybe that plays more next year too. But I think for this quarterback class specifically, I don't see the 5th year option as like something you need to really grab. But so as we like talk about some of these teams that like could use some depth, and like the Bills are one of them. We just did the Rams, and like they are a team that is continually interesting to me. And like we talked about this a lot during their run. Again, like the F them picks, the kind of thing where they don't have 1st round picks. They don't have a 2nd this year because of that Von Miller trade. But they have still like 8 picks. And they are just continually a team that is going to be replenishing the back end of the roster and filling those future needs. Like if we talk about that, the teams that do that, like it's the Rams. And I think like we're getting to a point now where like it's a necessity. Right. So like, I think we kind of see, Andrew Whitworth retires, but they already have a tackle who's able to slide in. They've had him, but like that had another contract. We just saw Sebastian Joseph Day, who was a mid-round pick, one of the best, run defenders, and helped out by being next to Aaron Donald. We see him; he got hurt last year, but also now was at the end of his rookie contract. Takes another moves in free agency to the Chargers. Play with Brandon Staley, like that. That's going to be fun. But you have Greg Gaines, who's able to slide right in, who was a mid-round pick the following year. But again, he's now going to be on the final year of his rookie deal. So they're continually, moving these guys in. Darius Williams was, there no draft capital like put into him. He plays really well with Staley. Last year was a little up and down in 2021. And now you have like Robert Rochelle, who's a 4th round pick last year, and like he's going to slide in there. I think you have like at safety, you have Jordan Fuller, who was a 6th round pick, was able to slide in for John Johnson. Again, like he got hurt through the playoffs, but he was like that green dot safety for them. You have like Nick Scott, who was a late round pick who slid in once Jordan Fuller got hurt. So you just kind of have all of these pieces, but the Rams are kind of like, again, and when I was writing up the defense, it does, especially on that side of the ball. And I think on offense, kind of it does too. You have a game changer on every level of the defense that just makes it easier for for these guys to slide in. I think that's why they're so successful, because they only need a couple of traits, right? You only need Greg Gaines or Sebastian Joseph Day or whoever you're putting on the defensive line to be like, he can be pretty good at like one thing. And when you're next to Aaron Donald, that one thing is like a force multiplier because you're like next to Aaron Donald. I think that it works out with linebackers now too. They brought in Ernest Brown in the third round last year. He played really well in the beginning of the season, then got hurt, came back for the playoff run. But now you're putting him next to Bobby Wagner. Now his responsibilities are a little less, right? So like that makes him better. At corner, you have Jalen Ramsey, who's either being a shutdown outside corner or he's playing in the slot. That makes the other cornerbacks' jobs a little easier. I think the way they play their safeties makes the job of those safeties easier. So I think like they know exactly what role they need these guys to fill, which is why these like mid to late round picks keep hitting at the rate they do. But it's also because of like all of those stars that they have brought in. It makes the job so much easier. So that's why I think like this has been like a somewhat sustainable strategy for them, just because the responsibility of these late round guys, like, yes, you do need them to play immediately, but you're not asking them to like take over a defense. And even like on offense too, I think we've seen it. Like the wide receivers have been like a little shakier. I think we haven't seen them hit quite as well. Like Tutu Atwell might just be like a complete miss, but again, like they're taking so many swings at wide receiver, where like you can, even with the draft, they don't have a lot of draft capital. Like even with that, you can take a swing and a miss on a Tutu Atwell and still be okay.
Yeah, I mean the Rams are interesting. I mean, I'm a little bit different than you. I don't think it's sustainable what they're doing. I think they've gotten pretty.
But I think it's sustainable for now, right? I think like in like this year is really.
Ask
I think
Seattle how it is living this way when you don't continuously have first round picks and just try to make 6th and 7th round picks work out for you. But you make a good point about just the star power that they have and making those jobs easy, make the transition period easier. And I've mentioned it as well as this is why I believe like when you look at the guys that leave the Rams, they just aren't good players. They like when they go other places, they don't typically aren't good players. They haven't been good signings in other spots because of that. They're asked to do more things outside of their shoes, and it gets exposed. It's going to be interesting. Like you said, it's more just like how we've gotten to this point. Because remember, they made a lot of good draft picks to get to this point. Aaron Donald, Cooper Kupp, they drafted those guys. Now we're starting to see like a lot of the guys that they added throughout this process, like all start to come up for contracts or leave the team. It's like, how do you replace things at once, right? You lose 2 offensive linemen. They do sign Noteboom to an extension. Now this year coming up here, you have 2 more starting offensive linemen in the final years of their contract, and Rob Havenstein and David Edwards. At wide receiver, you still would like a lot more depth there. We saw when Odell Beckham left that game in the Super Bowl how the offense performed, and you add Allen Robinson, maybe you bring Odell back to you get an end of the season push. But we did see that the Rams, like, there's still an injury to Cooper Kupp or Allen Robinson away to like not still really having a really good wide receiving core. And if Allen Robinson were to get hurt, you see how it makes things difficult on an offense to be run through a slot receiver, even if it's the best slot receiver season that we've ever seen in NFL history. I mean, Cooper Kupp and Matt Stafford got it together for that last drive, but you saw how they were getting squeezed, up until that point when Odell Beckham left the game. So there are just like depth concerns, even at running back, Darrell Henderson's in the final year of his contract. Is Cam Akers going to be that player that we saw at the tail end of 2020? Is he ever going to get that back? We don't really know. We'll see how this offseason, kind of is for him having the full season. I feel like he got kind of penalized for making an incredible recovery we never seen. So we'll see how he bounces back. But I mean, they're going to be really good. Again, I'm just really curious to see how long they can keep this type of thing going. They have their first next year though, right?
Maybe.
I mean, 2023, I think they have more picks, right? So I think that they've positioned themselves in a really good spot here where if they don't burn those this year, I feel really good about still the direction of this team. So you're going to have Stafford basically retire there. Cooper Kupp's in a multi-year contract. You still have Ramsey, Aaron Donald. As long as they don't continuously keep doing this, I think it worked out to the best it could have in the short term. But I don't think you want to live this way like all the time.
Right. And I think we talked about it leading up to the Super Bowl when I was like really on this. They made the best bets they could have with who they gave up those first round picks for, right? I think like even like post, Brandon Cooks, like I think when you have like it ends up being like Jalen Ramsey. And again, like that could have been like Jamal Adams has been like a player that went for a similar draft return. And like that doesn't change the defense in the same type of way. That doesn't make it easier in the way Jalen Ramsey has for the Rams. So I think they've made, and like even Stafford, again, like we can say like whether you think Stafford is like a top 5 or top 10 quarterback, like it doesn't really matter, but his skill set completely changed the way the Rams were able to play offense. And that was like for the better of like everyone involved. So they really did like as well as they could have with the guys they did acquire for those first round picks, which is great. And I think like I agree with you to the point where like this is like this is kind of the year where they do need to start replenishing, because those rookie contracts are up of like the guys that they were able to bring in and have been a significant piece either like in building up that roster or being the people who can step in after some of those other veteran contracts are done. So what they do here, I think is going to matter, but I think like they do have a very smart scouting process. And I know like we don't want to say any teams are like better at drafting than others because we just kind of know in the long run, but I think like the Rams in the way they approach it, and being able to just kind of fill these guys into very specific roles, which is not a luxury a lot of other teams have, like even in like their early round picks, right? Like, but so I think like this is why the Rams have been good to this point, and like again, it up in the air whether it completely sustains going forward. But
they don't have their first round pick in 2023.
Okay,
or their fourth for
didn't
Sony.
think
They
so.
traded Sony Michel last year too. So they still have one more year after this where it's the.
But again, like they still have a lot of picks, like, right? And so while um it's not to the point where like all of those picks are valuable, right? Because when we're doing these team needs, we do have a graphic that shows like how many picks, and in terms of
The value of those
in terms
picks.
of like the overall value, yeah. So like they have a lot of picks, but it's not like high. But again, like they got 5 comp picks, and like in a single pick equivalent, in terms of like if you're looking at like approximate value of how you kind of view that, like they got the 53rd overall pick just from comp picks this year. And like they are a team that has continually played that game, so they do like acquire picks, right? It's not an F them picks thing in a way that they like go into the draft with 2 picks. Like that's never going to happen for the Rams. Even if they do continue to be aggressive, trading some of their picks away for veteran players, like they're never going to go into a draft with 3 picks. Or anything like that. So I think they have a balance, which I think like it continually makes them interesting, and it is how I don't think it's replicable, right? And I think we've kind of seen some other teams be more aggressive in trading these first round picks and like building off like what the Rams have tried to do. I think that's a very it's a very thin line for what is successful and what's not. It has worked out for the Rams, but like if I was another team, I probably wouldn't be trying to replicate this philosophy, at least to the extent the Rams have. So I think like that's kind of the give and take with what they've been doing here. But I think like for the Rams and how they've approached it, I think it does work.
I mean, well, there's the proof is in the results. I mean, it's one of those things too. I look at, they've got 8 picks, 5 of them are at pick 211 or later. To me, that's like 5 players that probably aren't going to make. You have to count on not making your roster, and they not going to get second contracts in the NFL. But they've hit on those picks, and like I said, John Schneider did this for a couple of years, and then it eventually, and Rick Spielman as well did this for a little bit, and then like eventually those picks come back, and like it come back to that. When you hit on those picks for a sustained period of time, it eventually comes back. It always does. It always has in the history of the NFL. So I'll be curious to see if they do keep plugging in these guys that seemingly that you would just be this a throwaway pick almost. They keep hitting, but it has worked out so far. I can't push back on the actual results, because I mean they're going to be a Super Bowl favorite again. NFC's wide open. I like their team a lot.
Yeah, and it's just it's a team that I think is going to be like in all aspects going to be fun to watch. Like, what are they going to do in the offseason? Like, they've been in contact with Stephon Gilmore. They've been in contact with Tyrann Mathieu. So like there's always something around the corner with the Rams, which I think is what makes them a very exciting team. And I think like we continue to don't want to get like too far into like what we're going to see during the 2023 season, but like there are places where they could improve also off what they did. So like I don't think we saw peak Rams necessarily throughout the 2021 season. So yeah, like when we look at like team needs and like what do these teams think they are? Like how do we see these teams like taking what they have in the draft and putting that going forward into their team building strategy? Like I think the Rams are up there in teams that like really make this part of the offseason really interesting. Yeah, so I think we can end the show here. We've been going on. We'll continue to be talking draft on sharpfootballanalysis.com. We will continue talking it on the podcast here. There'll be some more podcasts to come as we get the lead up to the draft. Remember, you can find all our work on sharpfootballanalysis.com. You can follow Rich on Twitter at Lord Reeves. You can follow me on Twitter at Dan Pizzuta. Thank you guys for listening, and we will talk to you again soon.